Voters of Colorado. Okay, I got it. We got it recording. I have some prepared words, so bear with me as I plod through this with you all. But really, I just want to say welcome. I'm looking out the window here in Denver now. I don't know what it's doing across the state of Colorado, but it is such a beautiful day. And thank you all for sharing your time as you do, it seems like every day with the league. We appreciate you being here. But the board of directors, our executive director, Beth Hendricks, and I would like to welcome you officially to Making Democracy Work Day. I believe this annual conference is exciting and important to all of our league members because it's what we do. Each and every one of you working with the League of Women Voters, doing what we do best, encountering and educating voters. This is helping democracy work. Today is no different, and we have a great agenda about the state's water issues. The Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, known as TABOR. We're gonna talk water, TABOR, information about the 2023 ballot issues that I know you're all chomping at the bit to get to, especially Proposition HH, how Colorado election systems works for people living with disabilities, and so much more. Today is the first day of autumn, and we all know what that means. At the league, it's election season. Yes, it's beautiful, but we all take a deep breath. I know that so many of you are working around the clock to ensure that Colorado voters vote and are informed when they vote. You're organizing candidate forums, holding ballot issue presentations, and answering many, many questions. And the board and I thank you for making the league look great for the 103rd year. Just makes me tingle. It's so exciting. Here at the State League, staff and board have been putting in hours towards education and advocacy materials on 2 issues on the state ballot. And we all know that this is practice for 2024. We sure don't know what's going to happen next year. There's a lot to be decided yet, but we'll be here as the stalwart watchdogs and defenders of democracy that we are. And we couldn't be more grateful to all the board members, the leaders, and league members for standing up when you're needed. And it seems that you're needed each and every day. Before we get started, just a quick details. Reminder, please raise your hand, well, not physically, but your little cute hand, emoji hand, if you'd like to ask a question. And please remain muted until you are called upon. And in an effort to maintain civility, disrespectful behavior will be removed from our meeting immediately. So I think we're ready to go. You're all staring at me like, let's get to it. I'm ready to get to it. And our first speaker is Cathy Chandler-Henry, a 4th generation Coloradan and president of the Colorado River District Board. She represents Eagle County since 2017. As such, she is also leading the Colorado River Drought Task Force, created by the Senate Bill 23-295, which passed the state legislature with near unanimous support in both chambers and was signed by Governor Polis in May 20th of this year. Ms. Chandler-Henry has served as a member of the Eagle County Board of County Commissioners since 2013. She's been doing her time, guys. We need to listen to her because I think she knows what she's talking about. It's very impressive. She was appointed as the board chair in 2017. She is the county's representative to the Water Quality Quantity Committee. Rudy, if I hope I pronounced that right, Cathy, you'll correct me. Rudi, that's better. Rudi Reservoir Water and Power Authority, Northwest Colorado Council of Government Economic Development District Board of Directors, Lake Creek Affordable Housing Corporation, and First Net Government Board. Cathy, we just can't thank you enough because you don't have any minutes, let alone hours in your day. So I would like to welcome you to the League of Women Voters Making Democracy Work Day. Yours to take now. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. And thank you all for inviting me here today. And I did just want to start out by thanking the League of Women Voters for all the work that you do protecting democracy. It's so critical now more than ever. And it's critical from every level, and then from national issues to the Drought Task Force. So thank you for all the work you do. And thank you for that kind introduction. The only thing I will add to that is that my sister Susan is on the screen here today too, Susan Chandler-Reed, who's a member of the League of Women Voters, and we both grew up together in the Western Slope of Colorado. So it's exciting to be here with all of you and to be here with my sister Susan. As Irene mentioned, I was appointed this summer by Speaker Julie McCluskey to chair the task force. So I'm here today to talk to you all about that at a high level and answer any questions that you might have. The picture behind me, in case you're wondering, is the Colorado River as it flows through Eagle County. I wanted to start out by giving just a little bit of context about the Colorado River and about the Colorado River in crisis, which is the whole reason that the task force was developed, is to try and address some of those issues. The Colorado River provides water to 40 million people throughout the basin. Provides water for agriculture, for industry, for municipal uses, for the environment, and the river itself. I mean, just being able to have a river and look at it, there are some push out there to think of the river itself as having rights. So lots of competing interests on the Colorado River. It includes 7 states, 2 nations, the United States and Mexico, and 30 tribal nations. So a lot of intergovernmental geographical use of that river as well. The Colorado River Compact of 1922, which I'm sure everyone has heard of in some form or another, and all the documents that have succeeded that set out what is called the law of the river. And we were talking about that a little earlier this morning with Maud, as you all were getting online here. The Colorado River, the law of the river, is really a fascinating and complex and lifetime's worth of subject matter there to dig into. But the Colorado River Compact, in brief, said that there are 15 million acre feet of water in the Colorado River that are to be divided equally between the upper basin and the lower basin. Sounds simple of that, simple enough, but there's likely never been 15 million acre feet, maybe not even in 1922. There are certainly not 15 million acre feet of water now in the river, and it's projected that it's more like 12 million acre feet or maybe even 11. I do have 2 slides that I want to share with you that sort of lay this out, and give me just a moment. Share. All right, this is upper and lower basin, showing that Wyoming, Utah, Colorado, and New Mexico are upper, and the lower basin includes California, Nevada, Arizona. Mexico is not on this map, but it also is a partner in the Colorado River Compact. This is the piece that is really critical and is leading to all the work that's being done on drought. The orange bars are the water that has been going to the lower basin, and the yellow is the water going to the upper basin. So you can see that blue dotted line across the middle is 7.5 million acre feet. That is where both bars should be meeting. They are not. The upper basin uses in 2021 about 3.5 million acre feet, and in water year 22 it was a very similar look at that. So you can see that there's overuse in the lower basin. The upper basin is not getting its full allocation, and the tribal nations also have not been getting their full allocation ever since the compact began. So that's a problem right there. Colorado has been working on this. the Colorado River Task Force was set up to address this. And just one other piece on that broad background is that climate change, which we all know is affecting everything in daily life, also affects the operations of the Colorado River. There's less precipitation, the temperatures are higher, and the USGS has projected that for every 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit increase in temperature, that leads to a 9.3% decrease in flows in the Colorado River. That's according to the USGS. So climate change is a compounding factor on this lack of water and this overprojection by the fine folks in 1922 about what was there to be divvied up. As Irene noted, the Colorado River Drought Task Force was established in the last legislative session. It was not without controversy. It was adopted nearly unanimously, but it was had a lot of late night discussion as it was being discussed. There are a lot of water user groups out there already. There's a Colorado Water Conservation Board, all the various conservation districts, Southwest, Southeast, and the Colorado River District. There are conservancy groups, there's ag groups, there are the Front Range water users, there are all the Trans Mountain water diverters. So there was some vested interest in not giving up discussion of these critical issues to a task force group. It finally made its way through after that vigorous debate to being set up. And at that point, then it became a mad race to see who got the seats on the task force. So the discussion sort of went from this isn't necessary, this could be dangerous to have other people discussing the Colorado River, we should leave it to water attorneys and people who know what they're doing, to I want a seat on the task force and I'm going to be upset if I don't get that seat on the task force. So I think things have settled in now. We have had 4 meetings of the task force. The first was the very end of July, and that was to meet the legislative requirement that the first meeting be held by July 31st. So we've had meetings. There are 17 members on the task force. Each of those members have alternates. We're meeting in person whenever possible, and all the meetings are open to the public. So I think that sort of anxiety and tension around who's going to have those seats and how is it going to be operated, that has calmed down a little bit. The 17 seats on the task force are held by a variety of user groups, including agricultural users, municipal users, Trans Mountain diverters, environmental groups. They were appointed by the Speaker of the House, by the President of the Senate, by the Department of Natural Resources, and by the tribes. The task force has 17 voting members. 2 of those are tribal members, one from the Southern Ute Indian tribe and one from the Ute Mountain Ute tribe. As chair, I'm a non-voting member, and we also have the state engineer, Kevin Ryan, who is a non-voting member. I think the real value of this task force is that diverse representation, that public discussion, and the charge of the task force to deliver recommendations. I have one more slide I'm going to put up which shows the purpose of the task force, and this is directly from the legislation. And let me pull that up, and I'm going to also read it because it's pretty dense and it's critical. It says the purpose of the task force is to provide recommendations for potential state legislation. So that is really what the task force is doing. That gets to that value that I talked about, the importance of having a group of folks across the state who are versed in water use, water policy, water law, to provide recommendations. And they are looking at providing additional tools. There's all sorts of groups to cooperate with there. The Colorado Water Conservation Board, the River District, Southwest, and water rights, ag producers, all those users that I talked about, the Indian tribes, and local governments. We're looking at programs that address drought in the Colorado River Basin and interstate commitments. So that is big. It's within the state. It is the interstate commitments, and it's through the implementation of demand reduction projects, looking at how can we deal with all this drought that is going on. We've got a short timeline. Those recommendations are due to the legislature by December 15th. There'll be an interim report before then. And the other player in this is the Langdon Group. They're providing facilitation services and support services. Those recommendations that have to be provided have several really specific things that were addressed in legislation. That was part of all of that discussion, is making sure that the guardrails are there on what these recommendations have to do. Some of the things that are listed is that they have to avoid disproportionate impact, economic impact, and environmental impact to any subbasins of the state or any particular regions, any particular population groups of the state. So if the Western Slope Ag is being asked to commit water to assist with drought, then the Front Range urban communities also need to be committing water to assist with drought. So that's that disproportionate impact. Requires that any reduction in use of the river through any demand management project has to be voluntary, it has to be temporary, and it has to be compensated. So those are three really big words that you'll hear a lot. Any rancher, for example, who puts water in the river to get to the lower basin for their thirsty use down there, he has to be guaranteed that he's not going to be using his water right, or she has to be temporary, compensated for that, and it has to be a temporary use, not a long-term use. Has to maintain the authority of the state engineer. That's a statement in there which basically means that the doctrine of prior appropriation has to be respected. That doctrine of prior appropriation says first in time, first in right. If you have pre-compact water, meaning you filed for water rights before 1922, you are sitting a lot happier than folks with junior water rights, which is all the Trans Mountain diverters. Those came after the compact and they came after most of the agricultural rights. Means that senior rights holders get the water first. If you're junior and it's a low water year, your headgate will get shut off. You won't have as much water to use because you have junior water rights. So that's a big one. Another one is that it has to be consistent with Principle 4 of the conceptual framework of the Colorado Water Plan. And I do want to read that to you. And it says, a collaborative program that protects against involuntary curtailment is needed for existing uses and some reasonable increment of future development on the Colorado system, but it will not cover a new Trans Mountain diversion. So that is really big. Colorado is growing. We have a huge number of climate refugees who are coming here from states where it's really inhospitable to live for a variety of reasons, like Texas. It's 105 degrees there. Folks are coming to Colorado. They want to live here. Folks from the Front Range come over here to the Western Slope on the weekends in the summertime because it's hot. So we have huge growth in Colorado. How do we deal with that growth? How do we get water to those Front Range communities? This says that any agreement that is reached through these drought programs cannot include a new Trans Mountain diversion. So that's a big deal. In addition to these requirements that the legislature has set out, the task force has talked about 4 other requirements that are sort of informal but are on people's minds as we're looking at recommendations. And those are, any recommendations must do no harm. They must prioritize the needs of Coloradans, and that gets back to that orange column and the yellow column in that graph. That upper basin has to be protected. So any recommendations we make within Colorado as part of the upper basin have to prioritize the needs of the state of Colorado. We need to be proactive in addressing the impacts of drought, although someone pointed out maybe it's a little late for that. As soon as we can do anything, the better. And it needs to be responsive to needs identified by the public. So that's sort of where I want to end with, is thinking about this process that the task force is going through and the public engagement and the transparency that we are all trying to, excuse me, work on in that process. We're looking at intrastate tools and programs that can be used within the state of Colorado, and interstate tools and programs that deal with Colorado's interstate commitments. So far, the task force has developed 5 draft recommendations in the intrastate realm, and those are to continue community technical assistance grant, to allow water plan grants to be used for aging infrastructure. That's a big deal. There are a lot of leaky pipes and ditches and water transfer systems that are not the most efficient as they can be. Very expensive to repair and replace those. So asking the state of Colorado to leverage their funds, to leverage federal funds to repair that aging infrastructure. To think about flexibility in the use of stored water. So that's a big one too. There are reservoirs. There are not a lot of reservoirs in Colorado. Our big reservoirs are outside of the state boundaries and deliver water to the lower basin, and that's Lake Powell and Lake Mead. But we do have reservoirs within Colorado. It would be nice to be able to have reservoir releases to cool down the river. For example, the Colorado River gets so hot in the upper Colorado by State Bridge, Bond, and McCoy that it kills the fish. If water could be reduced from Wolford Reservoir for the purpose of cooling the water, that would benefit the environment, would benefit downstream users. It gets tricky with water rights. So that's one of the potential recommendations, is to look at some flexibility in the use of stored water rights, and to increase state funding for turf removal programs. A lot of cities, especially Front Range cities, Grand Junction, on the western slope, they're looking at turf removal programs, also very expensive. So encouraging people to plant Colorado native landscapes, drought-resistant plants, that will help in water conservation. The next meeting we have, which is coming up on Thursday, will continue the discussion of these intrastate tools. We'll start talking about interstate tools and those interstate commitments. The meetings are held every 2 weeks. We're meeting throughout the state. So far, we've met in Aurora and we've met in Grand Junction. Our next meeting, as I said, is in Granby. Then we'll be traveling down to the Southern Ute headquarters in Ignacio, the Mountain Ute headquarters in Toyoak, and then coming back up to Glenwood Springs. The meetings after that will be set up. There is public comment built in to the beginning of every meeting. The first hour is open to public comment. You can come in person and comment, or you can comment online. So I think that's really an open invitation to all of you, to anybody you know who's interested in these drought issues. You can find out what's been going on, and you can jump online and make some recommendations. We've had some excellent public comment that has really been helpful. I wanted to talk about a couple of resources that are out there, and then I'm finished up. But there are numerous books out there that you can look at. A couple that I think are really helpful. There's one called Where the Water Goes by David Owen that looks at, it's called Life and Death Along the Colorado River. There's one called Science Be Damned, which is How Ignoring Inconvenient Science Drained the Colorado River. And that's by Eric Kuhn, who used to be the general manager of the Colorado River District, and David Fleck, who writes a lot about the Colorado River. There's a great book called Colossus about the building of the Hoover Dam. It's called The Turbulent, Thrilling Saga of Building the Hoover Dam. So that's a good one as well. Water Education Colorado has a whole series of resources called the Citizen's Guide. It's a citizen guide to compact compliance, to water law, to everything you might want to know about Colorado River. Those are really helpful. Colorado Water Conservation Board has a good website that has those infographics I showed earlier, along with all kinds of information. The Colorado Water Plan is on there. Colorado River Water Conservation District is statutorily charged with protecting the resources of the Colorado River. They have a wealth of information on their website. You can also sign up for their newsletter to get information. And the Colorado River Drought Task Force has a website as well, which is ourdroughttaskforce.com. So that's it for me. If you have questions, I'm happy to try and answer those. You can send me an email. My contact information is out there on the Colorado River Drought Task Force as well, or on the Eagle County website, has my cell phone, has my email address. So reach out if there's anything you'd like to discuss, talk about, and participate in the task force if you can.
If anyone has any questions, you may use the hand raise feature under the reactions button. Jeanette.
Good morning. I'm Jeanette Hillary. I was the lobbyist on the bill to support the Drought Task Force. I've followed water issues now for about 30 years in Colorado, and it's exciting to see how you're being organized. And I have to admit, I've been negligent about not getting online and seeing some of the other stuff going on. Just as an aside, when you mentioned temperature cooling, because the water temps are going up so much, and it is harming water quality and environmental needs for fish and little things that swim around. There was a bill that was encouraging aqua voltaics, which it wouldn't, so you could put covers, these panels for voltaic panels on it for power, but it would also help cool down the temps. And it would take some looking into, but I'll send the committee it's something to look into. It's new industry. It is being developed, but I think we are going forward. It's a monstrous use. And when you're looking at interstate stuff, and particularly the other downstate users and their overuse, for one in particular, for decades, I think we need to really look at that. And I congratulate and commend the group to handle that. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, thanks. Really good comments. And that that agrovoltaics is interesting too, looking at putting agriculture under solar panels. So interesting. I see a comment in the chat talking about not only focusing on drought. Good comment as well. That is our legislative charter. So that's what we're focusing on, although I will say that it does include all of the other things you've inserted in that insightful comment. Allocations based on percentages, I think, that's a recommendation that could certainly come out of this task force. That gets into redoing the Colorado River Compact. There's some consternation about opening that up because the political power is in the state of California. They have far more representatives than any of the other states that are involved in the Colorado River Compact. So there's some concerns about opening up that Colorado River Compact. The Bureau of Reclamation is the water master for the lower basin. So all of the administration of those lower basin states happens through the Bureau of Rec. The upper basin is through each individual state. And you had a question about resources on the Arkansas River Basin. Go to the Colorado Water Conservation Board, CWCB website. There's a lot of information there on each basin, including when those basin roundtables meet.
Thank you for that. Susan Stark.
Are there any studies of utilization of reducing evaporation of water? I happen to be in Southern California and see this huge canal of water absolutely open to the air. And I think in parts of the Middle East and other parts of the world, they do cover canals to reduce evaporation. Could you address that?
Yes, thanks, guys. You guys are smart and paying attention to water issues. That's huge. So in the lower basin, and their allocation is of 7.5 million acre feet, that does not include transit losses from moving water from one place to another. It does not include evaporation. There has been a lot of discussion in the upper basin that it should. I think if the Bureau of Rec were to look at its calculations taking into account evaporation, that then the lower basin would start looking at doing some of those fixes that you've talked about to prevent some of that evaporation. Moving water to those huge reservoirs like Powell and Lake Mead, there's a lot of evaporation that is lost there. The lower basin does not count its water use until it is actually consumed. So a rancher or a farmer in the Imperial Irrigation District can call for water out of Lake Mead. Bureau of Reclamation sends the amount they have requested plus the amount to cover transit losses and evaporation to that farmer. That extra amount to get the requested amount of water to that irrigator is not counted against the lower basin. So that's part of what leads to that huge overuse in the lower basin is transit and evaporation losses. So really good question.
Maud.
Thank you, Kathy. Fascinating stuff, all of the stuff about the Colorado River and interest. Thank you for serving on the task force. A century ago, when the compact was written, the population in the basin, the whole basin, was a fraction of what it is now, and it was distributed very differently. How would that graph look if it were done on a per capita basis?
You know, I have not seen that, although the population, it's sort of like Colorado, 80% of the water is on the western slope, but 80% of the people are on the Front Range. I think it would probably look like that with the upper and lower basin as well. The populated areas are in the big cities of Phoenix and lower California. Los Angeles gets its water from the Colorado River. So that was part of the reason for the Colorado Compact when Del Carpenter from the state of Colorado got his colleagues from other states together, saying the lower basin states, especially California, are developing much more quickly than the upper basin. If we don't have a collaborative rule in place to talk about how water gets allocated and we go all on first in time, first in right, upper basin is going to be left dry. So that was the reason for splitting it up in the first place, and probably still a reason to be wary of protecting the upper basin uses. I could see a question in the chat about has the task force looked at Denver Water and the CSU water research on their Spur campus? They have not, and that's a great idea. There is a whole resource section on the task force webpage that people are sending in things like that. So I will be sure that we get that added. Thank you for that.
Okay, Kathy Wilson, and I'm sorry, we're going to cut questions off after Kathy to keep our agenda on schedule. We will email any additional questions to Kathy in the hopes that she has the time and inclination to answer all questions.
I would be glad
we will
to.
also be asking Kathy to please share her slides so that you all can see the maps and graphs.
Sure.
Thank you kindly. Kathy Wilson.
So Kathy, I'm going to pull back a little bit from the task force to the work you do in Eagle County. And I want to congratulate Eagle County for what they did with the Uinta Railway project and trying to at least pause it. Do you have any predictions or hopes or any comments regarding it? Because I don't think it's dead completely.
Huge hopes. Thanks for that. Yeah, we were really excited to see the lawsuit come down in favor of Eagle County and our partners who filed that lawsuit. So you're right, it's not dead, but it is back in the hands of the proponents who want to build that rail spur in the state of Utah to connect to the UP line and bring up to 100 trains of waxy crude through Colorado, right along this Colorado River that has to provide water for 40 million people. So we see it as a huge danger. It's not a matter of if there'll be a derailment, it would be when there would be a derailment. And the basis of the lawsuit was that those environmental considerations were not looked at nearly enough. So the state of Utah, their 7-county group, they could come back with a new proposal, a new NEPA analysis that would look at those environmental impacts and say that they have considered all of those and they want the project to move forward. So I think there are a lot more people keeping an eye on it this time. There'll be a lot more discussion about those potential environmental uses. And then the other piece of that is that the railroad has asked for private activity bonds, which are usually used to fund things that are for the public good that can't be funded privately. We don't feel that's a good use of private activity bonds. We don't feel that this is a public good, and that even, looking at the need for that waxy crude, it certainly does not benefit the state of Colorado. It goes to refineries on the Gulf. So I think more to come, but keep your eyes open and be advocates on that issue as well.
Thank you for all your work with that.
Thanks.
Yes,
Thank you
indeed.
all.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your expertise and your time on this beautiful day. We will be following up with you with a few more questions from our audience. And again, we really thank you for your time and energy on this really important topic. You have an ally in the league. I think that's clear. And next, our next speaker is Cameron Manning, who is a member of the LWVCO after serving 2 years as our operations manager. I'm sure many of you know and love Cameron as I do. Cameron received his bachelor's from Arizona State University and is currently pursuing his master's in public policy at UCLA. As a board member, Cameron has served as our liaison to the Colorado Civic Engagement Roundtable, a coalition of more than 40 nonprofits focusing on civic engagement. Our newly acquired membership in the roundtable allows us access to voter data known as the VAN, which will allow us to more effectively target particularly types of voters, say voters who only participate in presidential elections or Spanish-speaking voters, for education and get out the vote activities. I will let Cameron tell you more, including possible timelines for access. Cameron.
Amazing. I've got a bit of a presentation, excuse me, that I'm gonna kind of work through today. Let me get that for us. Okay. And I'm gonna kind of run through it. And because I think we're a little short on time, I'm gonna leave conversation and questions for the end, but just call out that I think when you say get out the vote with data, maybe we have a bit of a reaction. Maybe I think sometimes you can feel uncomfortable with that. So I just want to call it out and say that happy to kind of talk about any concerns, questions as we kind of work through, and we'll address those at the end. Hang on. So today I'm gonna introduce what Beth really just kind of announced, and that's talking about this special data partnership that the League of Women Voters of Colorado now has. I'm gonna discuss some of the benefits of using data and specifically in Get Out the Vote. I'm gonna provide an example of a phone bank specifically, and I use that. I want you all thinking right now, phone banks, what that could look like with you all, your participation, your local league. I'm going to talk about how to get involved, and if depending on how much time we have left, we'll have a short discussion, answer some questions.
Why am I not hearing this in my phone?
So we're going to be talking about something called the Voter Activation Network, or specifically VAN for short. And I want you all thinking about this as a database of voter data. This is a large database, and it's even more than that. It's a technology suite. It's a system. And it's operated by the largest political software provider in the US. Specifically, that's a company called NGP Van. And this database that we have access to now is the primary source of data used for the Democratic Party and nonpartisan nonprofits, advocacy organizations. Really, this is the hub of information that's used for folks interested in working on issues that the League is working on. And a little background, right? This is a company that grew and was founded by the CTO of Hillary Clinton's 2028 campaign. And real quick, right, say like, how do we get this? Right, so NGP Van, this company, they lease this software to an organization called State Voices. This is a national organization that supports 25 state-based coalitions of nonpartisan nonprofits. One of those organizations they support is the Colorado Civic Engagement Roundtable. We recently joined as a member of Colorado Civic Engagement Roundtable. I may refer to them as CSER for short. And as a member, we have access to Van, and because our state league has access to it, now we're at the step of how do we get our local leagues involved, and how do we really leverage this at the local level. So in this database, in Van, the Voter Activation Network, you may also hear me, someone else refer to this as Vote Builder. That's like the specific piece, the specific technology, specific database. But this is data that comes from really primarily state certified election results. It comes from USPS verified addresses, other government agencies. A lot of it comes from partner organizations, or just similar, as I said, nonpartisan, political oriented advocacy organizations. And then a significant amount of it also comes from consumer databases. And I think when I say that, again, sometimes we can feel a little uncomfortable, and I'm happy to kind of dig into that at the end. But what's in this database, right? And what's in here is all of us. This database has records of most Americans. And specifically, when we talk about this, we're talking about our voting history, not who we voted for, but what elections we voted in, where we voted. It includes demographic information. It includes our contact information, our addresses, our phone numbers. It includes information regarding, our outreach attempts or survey responses. So for example, you may have received a phone call or a text from an organization saying, hey, are you going to vote in this election? And if you reply and say yes, chances are your response has made its way back into this database. And also in here, where the real power of Van comes in, is there is a whole lot of predictive analytics. And this is just a fancy way of saying there's a lot of predictions based on this information. So there are scores and essentially statistics regarding, individuals' likely party affiliation, our likely income, our likely education levels, maybe, the likelihood that we have children, the likelihood that we are a member of the LGBTQ plus community, and on and on and on. Really, really hundreds, if not thousands, of these sorts of statistics that are generated based off of all voters. And so we have access to this now, and the question becomes, why use it? Why get involved, right? And I think, already you may have ideas, and this may come intuitively, but really at a high level, this is a way for us to reach more people, not constrained by geography. So say, get out the vote, right? We no longer have to be on that college campus face to face to try to get out the vote with someone, or outside the supermarket and be tabling and ask and say, hey, are you voting, right? This allows us this contact information, this really large database of people that we now have the ability to contact, to get engaged with, right? And what Beth kind of alluded to, right, is it allows us to make really hyper targeted and focused work. And I'm going to provide an example in a second about that. Because of this, we also have opportunities, I think, to increase our membership and support our fundraising. Really, just it's a numbers game, right? The more folks that the league can be in front of and talk about, the more likely they're interested and going to join us and support what we're doing. It allows us to stay competitive. This is technology that's being used by really everyone in this space, or most everyone, right? It's growing, and it's something that we really need to lean into if we want to be doing the best that we can. And specifically, we're also going to be talking about how we engage our members, right? I think sometimes we can think about, what do we do, as the league, and using data and using it for Get Out the Vote really provides an opportunity to give us something to do. I think about how this can leverage the league's strengths, right? So specifically, we have such a powerful network of volunteers. So how do we use all these volunteer hours, all this volunteer strength, and really, supplement and work with our partners in a way that's effective, right? And so the kind of the first step, I think, and what I'm really plugging here today is how do we get involved in phone banking? And what a phone bank is, right? It's a program in which volunteers, call or text voters over the phone. Typically, these are either events, scheduled, organized with target goals. Sometimes they're asynchronous, meaning you can, do a phone bank over the course of a week. They can be in person or virtual. And these days, they're supported by really easy to use digital tools. And I really want you not to be intimidated by this prospect, right? Because using these tools, using VAN, this means that we can run a phone bank in which everything is on one computer screen. We can use virtual phone numbers in which you're protecting your privacy when you either make that call or make that text. And it provides us to use scripts so that all of us as the league, which is very important, right? We can speak in one voice with the same message. And I want to throw an example, right, to make this a little less abstract, right? So say for an upcoming election, the League of Women Voters of Estes Park wants to increase voter turnout of those who live in Colorado House District 49 that are under 50 years old and who voted in the 2020 presidential election, right? These are very, very kind of simple filters. And I want you to, based off all those predictive analytics that I kind of reviewed earlier, there's just very, very few limits here, but this is a very broad example, right? And so say with this goal, the voter service team, they organize a virtual phone bank. They work with the League of Women Voters of Colorado, the Colorado Civic Engagement Roundtable, and they generate a list of target voters, and they train their volunteers. They get this list, they do this phone bank, and in 2 hours, 10 volunteers call 1,200 potential voters. They leave 900 voicemails. They speak with 60 voters, and from that, they learn that 5 are maybe interested in joining the league. So you can see how this is a way that can really, it expands our reach and allows us to talk with a lot of folks in a short amount of time. If you're interested, kind of 2 options as usual. The first is really, become a caller. Be attentive and think, when is there an opportunity for me to jump in? At this point, we do not have a training scheduled. I'm working with CSER specifically on that. This is something that has taken a little bit of time because they've been working through some staffing challenges. But if you're interested, I would say be aware and be checking your emails from your local league, the state league, or even opportunities that come from CSER and sort of trickle down, because there are trainings and really there are these opportunities that come up and people say, hey, you want to sign up for this phone bank? You say yes, you join. Call some voters, and then once you do it once, you can repeat and really be more successful, and it becomes much easier as you go. The second is if you think, I'm on that voter services team in my local league, this is something that really interests me, or you think, Cameron, I want to explore this beyond just doing a phone bank, shoot me an email. I'll put it in the chat as well, and I can really link you up specifically with the Colorado Civic Engagement Roundtable team. They have someone who is specifically dedicated for supporting their network with these kinds of projects. So we're going to be working on that. And if, again, as I said, if you're interested, really reach out. And then generally, advocate for using data for Get Out the Vote. So today, real quick. High level, right? We now have access to this database called VAN. All this voter data is in it. It allows us to run targeted phone banks for those specific potential voters. This can be added to your existing Get Out the Vote activities. And to get involved, wait to hear about training opportunities, phone banks that pop up, or shoot me an email and say, hey, Cameron, I really wanna jump into this. So that's what I got real quick today. If we have a moment, I'll answer a question. Otherwise, we can turn it over to Colorado Fiscal Institute. I'm excited to hear from them.
Thanks, Cameron. We do have a couple questions if anyone, or a couple minutes if anybody has any questions for Cameron.
Okay.
If not, we will be following up with lots more information. Debbie Vink is asking if this information could be used for a postcard campaign.
Yes, that's a great question, Debbie. It absolutely can. So I think, in a high level, I threw out their phone banks because I think that's the kind of the first step here, but maybe it's postcards for your local league. I think there's really three ways, right? The first is a phone bank, call, text. The second is, yes, a physical postcard campaign. Those tend to obviously be a little bit more expensive at that point. And then another kind of supplement to that, well, I guess I kind of mentioned earlier, really is that kind of texting component. We actually do have the ability to do automated text messages in which we pay, I believe it's, I think it's 6 cents per text message. So for example, we can do that. And again, that becomes a little bit more expensive, but yes, absolutely. I see a question from Julie. She asks, I'm curious about why electronic phone banking now often does not have us leaving voicemails, whereas in the past we were used to dial by hand and we were instructed to leave voicemail per the script. Has there been data showing that was ineffective? Julie, I really don't know. I may not be able to answer your question at this point, but I can definitely look into it. I think in my example, right now, I'm sure you all are aware, right now you call, you text folks and the people don't answer the phones anymore, right? Generally percentages are so small. I think, in my example, I estimated 5%, and that's actually quite high. Most people do not answer their phone. So specifically when you do a phone bank, it really is that repetitive process, whether that is a voicemail or whether that it just, it cuts out, someone hangs up on you. But for me, and I think from the league standpoint, I can't think of anything more powerful than getting a voicemail from one of our members. I think we have such a trusted brand identity that is really where we can shine if we have the ability to leave those voicemails.
Nancy Ball has her hand raised, and let's make that the last question for this round. If you have other questions, we'll get them to Cameron, and he'll shoot you an answer via email. Nancy.
Excuse my voice, I have COVID. Cameron, did I understand correctly that the van data has information on Democratic voters? What about Republican voters?
It has information on all voters, but this is specifically when I said that it's very much it's well tied into the Democratic segment, I should say, of political organizing. So for example, in relationship to the nonpartisan advocacy world, so it has information on all voters. But for example, it also has, say, contact information regarding what other organizations may do. So say that, our Common Cause, they do their own phone bank and they call a voter. And so when we can get into that database, we can pull a list, and in that profile, it says, Common Cause, talked with them on this date, and this was the outcome. So because it's sort of in this all, we're all sort of similarly aligned, I should say, I guess. I really hate that as like a nonpartisan organization. But we can see the outcomes from other organizations so that we can really duplicate attempts and kind of work more collaboratively.
Okay. Thanks so much, Cameron. Really appreciate your information and your energy for the league. And we will be following up with everyone here. So thanks again, Cameron. Okay, next we have Kathy White, the Executive Director of the Colorado Fiscal Institute. For more than a decade before helping found CFI as a standalone nonprofit in 2012, Cathy served as the director of the Colorado Fiscal Policy Institute, where she worked on issues ranging from tax credits for low-income families to immigration reform. Prior to that, Cathy worked in policy research and compliance for a national health insurance agency. Cathy is both a proud lifelong Coloradan and a veteran advocate for policies that enhance economic prosperities for working families. Please join me in welcoming Cathy, who will give us an update on the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, or TABOR. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me. I'm going to share my screen if I can. Let me see if I can do this. I am wondering if I can.
You should have the ability.
Yes, just looking to see if I can share a portion of my slides. Okay. If I go to slideshow view, can you see my slides, folks?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So,
Cathy, you're still not in slideshow.
there we go.
There you are. We see your
Okay.
slides.
Alrighty, great. Okay, well, thank you all for inviting me here today to talk about TABOR, my favorite topic. So Horace Austin Warner Tabor, the Silver King of Leadville. Oh, wait, sorry, wrong Tabor. This is not a tale of grub staking and scandal or rags to riches and then back to rags, or is it? Instead, lucky for you, we're going to talk about a different Tabor, the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, or what is known as Article 10, Section 20 of the Colorado Constitution. I'm going to just give you a quick overview of the basics of TABOR and then highlight the most important issues of today, which I think are the rebates. This is a really important history and backdrop to what you're going to talk about later, because it affects both of the specific ballot measures, Proposition II and Proposition HH, that you're going to dig into a little bit later today. So what is TABOR? TABOR is a constitutional amendment that was approved by voters in 1992. It is today and has been since then the most restrictive tax and expenditure limit in the country. TABOR applies to every level of government, from the state all the way down to special districts like art districts, transportation districts, and water districts. So what are the basic components of TABOR? TABOR is 1,900 words long. It has multiple subjects in it. And so we are going to focus on 4 of the basic buckets that we put all of that diversity into. The first one is the limits, that TABOR limits the legislature's ability to raise revenue. It requires voter approval of new taxes or tax increases, new debt or debt increases, and also any tax policy change that results in net new revenue for the district. This TABOR, the provision of voter approval of taxes, is the only override in TABOR, which is what makes it the most restrictive tax and expenditure limit in the country. Some places have legislative 2/3 majority, some people have a whole variety of things, but our Taxpayer Bill of Rights means that voters have to make these decisions, and so all of these decisions need to be done at the ballot box. It makes it expensive and restrictive and exclusive, and also the reason why it's the most restrictive. What else does TABOR do? TABOR limits the amount of revenue that any district, and I'm going to focus on the state here, can collect and either save or spend from year to year. For the state, this is by a formula of population plus inflation growth or change. Actually, you could go down, you could have deflation or decreasing population, and that would be the formula. And anything that comes in above that strict cap of population plus inflation needs to be returned or rebated to taxpayers through any reasonable method. The Constitution is pretty silent on how that gets returned to taxpayers, and the legislature has a great deal of authority to determine how they send that back to voters. And over the 30-year history of TABOR, they have done this through a number of different ways. And we're going to talk a little bit about what those ways are today. So what counts as revenue? I think it's really important when you're thinking about the cap overall that it isn't just taxes. People think, oh, it's general fund taxes, your income taxes, it's your sales taxes, and that's what goes into the cap. But that isn't really the case. TABOR also includes in that strict revenue cap cash funds, so fees from transportation, severance taxes. It has historically included things like tuition revenue or unemployment insurance premiums. So cash funds, unless they're specifically exempted, which some of those have been in our 30-year history, are included in the cap. And again, anything that goes above the cap needs to be rebated to taxpayers. One of the last things that TABOR does is, and we throw this in here because it's really important about making how communities can make change on their own. TABOR specifically limits certain kinds of taxing options, and it restricts local voters from making some decisions for their communities. So in our Constitution, there is a strict prohibition on real estate transfer taxes. There can be no statewide property tax. We cannot have a graduated income tax or a wealth tax, something that taxes income at a different rate from other income. You can't have a local head tax, or you can't have local income taxes. If a local government wanted to use one of these taxing options, they would have to go to a statewide vote of the people in order to approve a change to the Constitution, and then a local vote to implement that tax or debt increase, that tax. And then finally, we're going to touch on this just very briefly because it's important for Proposition II, is that TABOR has very strict elections provisions. As you all know, in a petition, when you see "shall taxes be raised" in all bold font, and there's a number of how much the tax would increase the total revenue collections, that is in the Constitution as a requirement. And with that, there's a requirement that voters be given a fiscal impact statement of the measure. And so legislative council staff has to do a blue book. Voters need that information to make these decisions on TABOR elections. And legislative council staff has to not only estimate or project the amount of revenue or money that the tax is going to bring in, the new tax or new debt or increased tax, but also how much total TABOR revenue the state or the district will collect with the addition of that tax. If they are wrong on either measure, then we have to go back to the voters and ask them to either approve the new revenue or to approve the rate that was passed. And so with marijuana taxes, you might remember, the legislative council was dead on when they estimated how much money the marijuana tax was going to bring in. What they misjudged was how big the economy was going to be. And so that difference needed to be refunded to taxpayers, or we needed to ask the voters to keep that additional revenue. With II, they were wrong on the amount of how much the tax itself was going to raise. And so that is why II means we have to go back to voters and say, can we not only keep this additional revenue, but can we keep the rate the same? Because TABOR requires that the rate, not only does the increased revenue need to be refunded to taxpayers, but the rate has to be lowered by a corresponding amount forever forward. So we do have a slide on that, but I'm sure Maud is going to talk more about that. So what's going on with TABOR right now? That's the history of TABOR. And as you can see, this is the TABOR outlook that came from the revenue projections that came out this week. We are expected, as we have for the last 2 years, to run big, historically large TABOR rebates. Our revenues are coming in much higher than the referendum C cap allows us to keep. And just a quick difference between what the TABOR revenue limit is and what the ref C cap is, because you'll hear legislators and people talking about both. In 2005, voters fixed a flaw in the TABOR population plus inflation formula. It had been prior to that you would apply that population and inflation formula to actually collected revenues, or what the formula would have allowed, whichever was less, which meant that we really swung back and forth between recession and recovery, and we could never really recover from a recession. So voters fixed that, and they just said that the ref C cap is population plus inflation applied to whatever the formula would have allowed the year before, regardless of whatever revenues are doing. So you have a more stable and trend line over time. So that ref C cap is the cap that budgeters use, the state uses today, and TABOR revenues, so fees, severance taxes, transportation taxes, income tax, corporate income tax, sales tax, all of that revenue is coming in higher than the ref C cap is going to allow us to keep. So we have big rebates in the forecast for the period. 3.57 billion in the current year, almost 2 billion the year after that, almost 2 billion the year after that, and then again over 2 billion in the following year. So these are, as I said, historically large rebates. I think one of the most important things to remember is we've had TABOR for 30 years, and we've had TABOR rebates for about a third of those years. More years without a rebate than with a rebate, because rebates are affected by not only the economy and the revenue that's coming in, but through policy changes. And so there could be years where either voters or legislators make policy changes that mean that we don't have these big revenues. Proposition HH is such a thing that the voters are going to decide. And so I think what's driving these rebates, again, these are historically large rebates. We've never seen rebates of this size. You probably got your $750 check last year. That was a TABOR rebate. We gave it in a check rather than refunding it through our income tax process, which is what we've historically done, because people wanted the money then and the liability was already accrued. And so you all should have gotten a check from Jared Polis. We have these historically large rebates because after the pandemic, we came out of the pandemic recession with huge corporate profits. That's one of the things that's driving these big increases. A wild swing in severance tax money and transportation related fees. And during the pandemic, we transformed our economy almost overnight from a service-based economy to a goods-based economy. We tax goods and not services. So even sales taxes from consumer spending were increasing at this unprecedented rate, because everybody was like making home offices and turning their garage into a gym instead of going on trips and buying, seeing doctors and that kind of thing. So that's one of the reasons why we're running these historically large rebates, and we are expected to have them for the next few years. How do we give the money back? Colorado uses a handful of rebate mechanisms. The first is some property tax refunds, right? A bill that was passed a few years to lower the assessment rate. We're paying for that, or we're paying that backfill back to local governments with TABOR refunds. And we also have a small senior homestead exemption thing that we've done for the last year. But the bulk of the money goes back through what's known as the 6-tier sales tax refund. And what that is it basically says that any taxpayer who files taxes in the state of Colorado gets some of this money back. It's a sales tax rebate so that you don't have to pay income tax at the federal level on it. And it's divided up basically by a formula that was determined in the 1990s. The assumption behind this mechanism is that the more money you make, The more stuff you buy and the more you earn. And so you should get a bigger share of the rebate. So people at the top end of the earning spectrum get a bigger rebate, and people at the bottom get a smaller rebate. Last year, we flattened that and gave everybody the same amount. And so we took a little from the top and gave to people at the bottom. This is important because Proposition HH, and I'm sure Scott will talk about this, has a mechanism in it where we will again flatten that historically large rebate that we know we already have. It's $3.6 billion that we're refunding to taxpayers in the current year. And so with Proposition HH, it triggers on a flattening of that, which will mean that everybody in whatever income spectrum will receive $898 in a TABOR rebate. And as you can see, for the people who are earning the lowest incomes, that's a $270 increase for them in the current year where we know we have these historically large rebates. So I wanted to talk just about our rebates going away. I'm sure you've all been hearing in the news that, Proposition HH is all about taking my TABOR. That is not true. The math just doesn't really show that. We published a report that really looked at what the TABOR rebate is expected to be under both a strong growth scenario and a historic growth scenario. And in both cases, people are still expected to receive a TABOR rebate, as well as getting the property tax benefits that are as a part of HH, which I'm sure Scott will talk more about. So if we look at both an average tax filer and homeowner in a strong growth scenario, they're expected to still get a TABOR refund over that period of time. Yes, there is a difference in it because Proposition HH is going to change that REF-C cap to an HH cap by changing it from population and inflation to population plus inflation plus 1. And even with that, the net savings under HH are still there. If you look at the historic growth rates instead of a strong growth rate, which is what's been out there, and you look at what's more likely to happen, it still is the case that people are going to see TABOR refunds under HH or current law, and they're still going to benefit from the property tax savings in HH. So I just want to close on Proposition II. This is the Blue Book analysis from Proposition EE, which was the cigarette tax. This is required by TABOR that Legislative Council estimate how much the tax is going to bring in. They were wrong on the revenue from the tax increase itself. So that is what must be refunded to taxpayers. And in this case, the taxpayers are not you and me, or even smokers and vapors. They are cigarette wholesalers and tobacco product distributors and nicotine product distributors. Those taxpayers are going to get the bulk of that rebate back. And what the state will have to do if voters don't approve EE is lower the rate by the difference. So because they were off in how much they thought that tax was going to bring in, they refund what they're off and lower the rate forever more. So TABOR basically assumes that voters are voting on this flat number and not on the rate itself, which is what Proposition EE is going to ask voters to clarify for the state. But I bring this up because both of these ballot measures are something that are related to TABOR and are dumb. This is a dumb way to run a state. In case anybody has any question about why we're voting on EE, why we keep voting on marijuana taxes, why we're voting on things like HH that are so complicated. And it really is because TABOR requires it. And the restrictions under TABOR, the only overrides to these restrictive limits are really through the ballot. And so that is all. That's what's happening with TABOR. It is kind of a story of rags to riches and riches to rags again, and scandal, but it isn't Mr. Horace Austin Warner TABOR's story.
Thank you, Kathy. We're running a bit behind, so I'd like to keep the questions brief. Jackie is asking if II is the fix to EE.
Yes, that is correct. II is the fix to EE. And I just want to say about that, in 2020, they estimated what the tax was going to bring in. And in 2020, we had a global pandemic where cigarettes and vaping and drinking, all of those sin behaviors just skyrocketed because people were probably stressed out or something. So even if the tax starts to come down to be more in line with what legislative council thought it was going to be, it doesn't matter, because in the year after the voters approved it, the increase happened in that year. So the state is required to reduce the rate of the tax forevermore, unless they ask voters to say, hey, did you vote on this number of $185 million, or did you vote on this rate? And so there you go.
Okay. Kathy, thank you for your time. I hope you're willing to share your slides with us, as we already have interest in seeing them. And there are a couple questions that we didn't get to that I would like to email to you. So great. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your great explanation of this really complex topic. So our next speaker, as Kathy alluded to, is Scott Wasserman. Scott has served as president of the Bell Policy Center and the Bell Action Network since August of 2016. Previously, Scott worked in the governor's office from 2013 to 2016, advising on healthcare, education, and workforce development, while serving as deputy chief of staff to Governor John Hickenlooper and chief of staff to both Lieutenant Governors Joe Garcia and Donna Lynn. Before that, Scott spent 8 years in leadership positions at SEIU and Colorado Winds, worked as a lobbyist, and served 4 years as Director of Communications and Press Secretary for the Colorado House Minority Office. Scott, thank you for joining us.
I'm happy to be with you. And good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for having me. Here's what I'm going to do is I'm going to do Kathy just gave you an excellent refresher or primer on TABOR. I couldn't agree with her more that this is a suboptimal way to run a state. And, I think what I'm going to try to do this morning is walk you through a very complicated proposal. There's just no way around it. And I know many of you have questions. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. I'm not going into slide mode, because what I have found is that I got to jump around a lot. Like others, I've got like 3 or 4 different permutations of these presentations. So I think I'll present, but I'm very open to questions. And I think that's probably the best way. So let me begin the presentation, and then Beth, if you feel like there's a major question coming up, feel free to interrupt, and we'll kind of go from there. So let me share. Let me make sure I'm sharing the right presentation with you. All right, great. Yeah, this is the right one. So Proposition HH, it's on your ballot this November, the 23 election. I'm not sure if this is something, I kind of came in late, but I'm not sure if this is something Kathy touched on, but this is an odd year election. And, it's really curious, those of you interested in trivia, is Colorado did not have off-year elections prior to TABOR. Off-year elections are a creation of TABOR, and there are certain kinds of questions that can be asked. Only questions related to TABOR can be asked in off-year elections. But we are in an off year, different than an even year election, for lots of reasons that you, as people focused on voter engagement, understand. Look, at the end of the day, when we try to boil it all down, I've tried to come up with so many different slogans and ways to think about this, but I went back to our tweets on this, and I think it really puts it the best. What does Prop HH do? 1, it lowers your property tax bills. We're going to talk about that. 2, it supports local services like fire, safety, and schools. We'll talk about that. And then 3, it keeps our promise to fund schools into the future. I like to think of this as not making good on, but working to keep to our Amendment 23 promise to fund schools. This is not the big fix. This doesn't put us in top per pupil funding for education. This does, help and stabilize education funding. And we'll talk about that too. It does other things. For instance, another thing it does is it makes the senior homestead exemption portable. But I'm not going to focus so much on that today. I want to focus on kind of these three areas. So, and a lot of you may be saying, well, like, what is the problem we're even trying to solve? Why are we lowering property taxes after so many years of trying to fund schools? We'll talk about schools and local share and all of that. But, I think the reality is we kind of are dealing with the challenge, and there are all kinds of different perspectives on this. But what you are seeing, you're looking at two things. That yellow line is just like residential assessed value over time has been going up and up and up, right? But we take snapshots, right? And every 2 years, right, we have an assessment cycle, and we take snapshots, and those snapshots are what inform your property tax bills, right? And you see these spikes. Now, you may be saying to yourself, okay, well, I see that I've lived through all these historic value spikes, but like, why haven't my property taxes gone up? Well, that has a lot to do with a constitutional amendment many of us had hoped we'd never have to talk about again. And I'll only spend a little bit of time on it. And it's the Gallagher Amendment. And those of you who've been here for a while, remember we passed the Gallagher Amendment in 1982. So for 40 years, we had an artificial buffer on residential property taxes. And every time, based on a formula that I'm not going to get into, because again, we burnt all those slides. We had hoped we'd never have to talk about Gallagher, right? And instead, what happened is that every time total property value went up in the state, right, it got balanced on the commercial side. So the legacy, right, that Gallagher gives us is that we have very high commercial assessment rates, right? Now, we can talk about, and I would love to talk about, how not all commercial properties are the same. I don't think Amazon should be getting the same, assessment rate as, say, like a small mom and pop shop. But we do have, and I'll show you a chart, enormously high assessment rates on commercial property, and residential property owners have been really buffered from value spikes over time because the commercial side took that burden, right? Just so you know, it doesn't matter politically, but I think it's important to note that we have the third lowest residential property taxes in the entire country. And I say it doesn't matter because a baseline is a baseline. And for many of us, myself included, this is a big jump. And so what I say, going back to this, is like, too much, too fast. Yes, we got to get there. Yes, we need more property tax revenue, but too much, too fast is not good from a political or policy perspective, huge economic consequences. So I try to cut to the chase in these presentations. Okay, now this is the presentation I gave in Montrose. I have other tables, and I was scrambling to see if I could throw in, part of the challenge, and we'll talk about this, is it's different for every community, right? So in Montrose, for instance, there was a median property value of 47%. We calculated they have, I think, 62 mills. I'll show you that later. And so these are the kinds of savings that people can expect to see, okay, in Montrose. The numbers are different in Boulder. I've got that if if later you want to see that. The numbers are different in Evergreen. And that's because, by the way, the property tax is a local tax, and I'll talk about that in a second. But I want you to see these numbers. People are always very interested to see, okay, so what am I going to save? And the thing that I'll point out is there is a type of progressivity going on here, right? If you have a $2 million home, the number in the second column, it's bigger than the others, right? But as a percentage of the total increase that we're expecting based on that 22 snapshot, okay, you're getting less of the savings. So this is progressive. Now, I will say there are challenges to this, right? Up in the mountains, particularly, you've got teachers making $75,000 who are sitting in $2 million homes. And I think one of the things that, Kathy and I and others have been talking about is that maybe we could be income targeting property tax relief in the future. But for the time being, HH is really trying its best to provide a progressive form of property tax relief. Now, how are we doing any of this? Okay, I just want you to bear with me, and I'll pause. This is math, right? And just I'll admit, like, I'm not good at math. I'm the president of the Ballot Policy Center, and I am not good at math. That's why we have great policy analysts, right? But every Coloradan has to understand this math if you're going to understand how the property tax relief is going to be delivered. So the first thing, okay, is the market, right? And like I said, every 2 years we have county assessors, and they go out and they take a snapshot of the market, and they say, boom, your house is worth $500,000. Okay. In the past, people didn't pay as much attention to this. Now this year, everyone appealed their assessment, right? Adams County rejected 72% of all assessment appeals. But you get a number, okay? That's what the assessor does. Number two, now the state comes in. State plays a couple roles. So one is we in this, and we did this in 22, by the way, we've already done some of this before, is we say, that $500,000 number you just got from the county assessor, well, we're going to lower it. We're going to lower it by $50,000. Now in 2022, we lowered it by $15,000. Okay. Big jump this year, more relief, right? To kind of compensate for the jump. And this is what gives you the progressivity, by the way, those of you who are my math people, right, is a standard singular number subtraction has a progressive impact, right? It's less for the $2 million homeowner than it is, right? It's very meaningful if you have a $500,000 house. And so times the assessment rate, we have a statewide assessment rate in this state. I think this is dumb. We could talk more about that another time, but the entire state has to have the same. So you are only paying taxes on $30,000, okay? So you have a market value or an assessed value, actual value, $500,000. We go through this math. $30,000 is now the torch gets handed off, right? Because you're in a relay race. Now it goes to the local districts, okay? And the local districts take their mills, okay? And this is why I said I'm gonna jump around a little bit. Your mills, okay? Welcome to Montrose, Colorado. These are the districts, okay, that are in play. Each one of them gets a little tiny piece of the taxes, right, to fund their stuff, okay? And so back to this slide. So after the mills, and so the statewide average is 83, okay? Montrose is at 62. I was in Aurora, and it was like 120 mills. Like, they really vary. And anyway, bottom line is that's how you get your property tax bill. So what HH does, right, is it's this part, it's the $50,000 subtraction, small adjustment to the assessment rate, okay? Let me get through like 2 more slides, and then I'll pause for a second. There's other stuff going on here for those of you who are commercial property owners and have been feeling the pinch of assessment rate increases over time. We are gradually stepping down the commercial assessment rate. But we can't just like do it immediately. Our communities are so reliant on commercial property tax revenue, right? Particularly, and there are different mixes all around the state. We'll talk about that in just a second when we talk about school funding. But we are generally, so there is a long-term nature to this plan of trying to step down gradually. And this is meaningful, right? This is important. And there's also, I don't want to get into this right now, new subclassifications that we're trying to create. We could talk about why we need maybe a more nuanced understanding of what different property types are. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but we have numbers for what commercial properties will save. Same kind of progressivity. All right. I would look at that. Now, let me pause. Anybody have questions just relating to, simple questions about property tax relief that HH gives? And then I'm going to talk about the cost of that and how we make up for it. And I can't see the chat. I apologize. I got too many.
No problem. Peggy.
Yeah. The thing that's been bothering me the whole time is, how do we know that our property taxes are going up? I mean, our valuation went up, but couldn't our school districts and stuff lower the mill levy?
Yeah. So that's a 2.0 question that I will get to. No, I'll just address it right now. Right. So that's a very good point. So like, it's a local tax. There was a heated committee meeting where, when all this was being put together, I remember one of the commissioners from a more conservative county was like, you legislatures, you the legislature aren't doing your job. And I was like, I got a little upset. It was late. And I was like, no, you haven't done your job. Like, every local district should be also looking at their mills and evaluating whether or not it's enough money or not. Now, as we'll talk about, it's different for every district. There are thousands. We literally have over 3,000 districts in the state of Colorado, a total product of TABOR, by the way. Okay, so you're right. In an ideal situation, every single community, and we even passed legislation last year to allow counties to temporarily change their mills to respond. Now, Douglas County has just done something that I will point out to you later that is different. And they have summarily lowered values, and that is a big deal. But lowering mills is totally within bounds. And if the Boulder County School District, is taking in too much money from the voters' perspective or from the boards, then they can lower mills, right? But in the meantime, the state really has taken on this burden over the last couple of years. It is a statewide problem, and maybe I'm regretting that the state has chosen to play this role, but we are playing this role, and we are trying to deliver relief across the state. Let me talk a little bit about the other side of the ledger, because one of the things that makes all of you amazing is you understand that there are two sides of the ledger, right? This is not about, I could go out and say, okay, I'll just lower all your property taxes. But as all of you know, this comes at a cost. And even though there's a spike, okay, remember, everyone's on a different timeline. You have districts that got a huge hit in the Great Recession, never made up for it, are looking for, I talked to the finance guy at Colorado Mountain College, special district for higher education. They are relying on a 15% year-over-year rate of growth to pay their bond obligations, okay? This is not just about like, do you have enough money or not? You have bond obligations, you have a certain rate of return that you're expecting, and every single district in the state is different. Some districts have no business keeping this money, okay? Other districts really do need it. So what we're trying to do then is like, okay, so we're cutting property taxes by a certain amount, but now we need to backfill, okay? And then this gets me to my slide, in this case, Montrose. These are the districts that need to be backfilled when they lose money. Now, in HH, and I'm not going to touch on this today, there's a tiering. If, for instance, Douglas County is going to see a 20% increase in revenue, they do not get backfill, okay? Poorer, more rural counties or rural counties that don't have as much revenue, or districts that are not growing as fast, they get backfill in the first 2 years of this deal, okay? And just if you needed a visual reminder, these are fire departments. This is Colorado Mountain College. That's a water district. These are the projects that we're talking about. And as I said, there are thousands of districts across the state, each with different needs, different histories, different projected revenues. So how do we solve this, right? So we have this issue. We're cutting property taxes, and some districts, especially school districts, are crying foul, and they're saying, whoa, we need money, even though there's a spike going on. So there's a Rubik's Cube dynamic here. You can keep trying to fix this, but ultimately, I think the only way that the lights all turn yellow is when the TABOR surplus comes into play. And Kathy did a great job of talking about the TABOR surplus, the C referendum C surplus, and as she showed you, I don't have the graphic in this presentation, our TABOR surpluses are out of control. We have a $3.8 billion TABOR surplus for this year that you'll get back next year. Everyone's going to get $1,600 next year. This is an incredible amount of money that, and I get it. Like, there are conservatives, ideological conservatives like John Caldera, who say, that's my TABOR surplus. Okay, cool. We're not going to convince any of those people. But what I would say is that for the rest of the state, that there's like the TABOR surplus is money that is on the table for us to use in appropriate ways to solve our issues. Okay. And in 22, it was legally established that we could use TABOR surplus to backfill local districts, right? But we're on the ballot. Why are we on the ballot? Because we're actually asking a bigger question. Okay. And the question is not just about next year or this year, it's about the next 10 years. And what HH asks is, can we keep 1% of the previous year's general fund expenditures each year for 10 years? Now, total general fund expenditures were somewhere around $16.5 billion this year, meaning next year, can we keep $165 million of the TABOR surplus? Okay, and why do we want to keep that money? We want to do three things with it. Okay, one, we want to backfill those local districts that I was talking about. Like I was talking to the firefighters yesterday. The price of buying a fire truck has gone up big time, right? It's like $1 million now. It's not $600,000 anymore, right? So we need to backfill those districts that need money, that are going to have a hole from these cuts. Two, we fought for and got in a big coalition some money for eviction defense. We have no more than $20 million can go to that fund, but there was a late effort to try to get some relief for renters in here. Maybe we'll talk about that if we have time, probably not. And then the big deal is funding for the state education fund, okay? Now, in the first couple years, not as much money is going to go to the state education fund because we got to backfill these local districts, and the money coming from the new HH cap is not as much. But then by year 3, the math really gets bigger, and we start to see a much bigger investment into our state education fund. I'm going to skip this for the sake of time. I mean, why are we even talking about schools? Well, I think for many of you, you know this math. You understand the legacy we have. For 10 years, we have fallen short on our promise on Amendment 23. One of the things we have steadily been trying to do is increase the local share. There are 2 components, 3 actually, to how we fund our schools. This gray line at the bottom is the local share. Notice how much it lags behind how much the state is putting in education. I've sat in focus groups, and focus groups are like, the state has screwed up funding for schools. And I just chuckle the way only a nerd could chuckle, that like, that was never the bargain. School districts are supposed to be funded by your local governments first, and then the state is filling in. But that's not what's happened over time because of Gallagher and lots of other reasons, right? And so we've been using the state education fund plus the general fund to maintain steady, albeit paltry funding for school districts while the local share is dropped. So if all of a sudden we're cutting residential property taxes, well, what's going to happen to the local share? It's going to go down, and then we're going to have to keep filling in more. So HH says, let's start putting money into our education savings account, okay? Because we know that there's an inextricable link between education and property taxes. You just can't talk about them without talking about both of them, right? So this is, why we're putting money into the state education fund. And then lastly, I want to talk about TABOR rebates. There is a flattening that occurs in year 1. When you vote yes on HH, you are voting to continue what Kathy talked about earlier, this flattening or making more progressive the TABOR rebate, okay? And here you're kind of seeing, everyone's going to get $898, which is just insane. And you can see some groups lose, but I want to remind you, I should put the percentages here. 64% of the state is under $100,000. And yes, that's totally depressing, but realize that, yeah, there are some quote unquote losers here in terms of the rebate they were otherwise going to get. But from our perspective, over 60% are going to be benefiting from this. Now, for the renters among you, and there are renters, there are groups that are very critical of HH, feel like it doesn't do enough for renters. Yeah, you're not getting property tax relief necessarily, but I would make 2 arguments. One is, first of all, you live in the community like everyone else, and so you will benefit from the backfill that goes to schools, fire districts, so on and so forth. 2, you're getting $898, $1,600, $1,700 if you're joint filers, right? So if you believe that if earlier you were underwhelmed by the property tax savings that I showed you, factor in $1,700 coming in from the state. If you're a renter and you feel like you're not getting the benefit of this, you are getting a $1,700 flat rebate. I will note, however, that the second, third, fourth, fifth year of this is not flat. And our governor has said that he does not want to continue a flat rebate. I think this will be a fun discussion next year, right? Because part of the tax justice of this is the flattening of the TABOR rebate. So I would just look ahead and say, you know, year one should continue in some way, shape, or form to maintain the equity in here. I'm gonna end like super soon. I just want to talk about, I want to scare you, okay? And you should be very, very scared. Initiative 50, which has been circulated and is about to qualify, they've turned in their signatures, is a 4% cap on the total amount of property tax revenue that the state can take in. And if we go over 4%, and you heard me right, by the way, total property tax revenue for the entire state, okay? If that goes over 4%, we have to go and have an election, okay, to decide whether or not local communities can keep that revenue. And they are about to qualify for the 24 ballot, okay, next year. And this is just showing you what total property tax revenue in the state of Colorado has been over time. Do you think a 4% cap is appropriate? Do you think we should be voting every single time we go over that cap? And furthermore, do you think someone in Lamar should be voting on whether or not Littleton gets to keep its revenue? That's what's going to be on the ballot in the 24 session. So I will just close by saying the Bell Policy Center supports HH. We have to pass this, okay, to deal with I think a crisis, which is property values going up too quickly by too much. It is a foundation for future property tax reform. And I think that what this does is at the end of the day, like this is balanced property tax reform, right? This is the property tax bill that we can vote for that we know either doesn't hurt or helps our schools. And this is the property tax relief that we can vote for that we know is not going to hurt our public safety and fire and counties and all those things we care about. There are other proposals out there, and there are people that'll say, we're going to cut your property taxes, you know, in ways, you know, you couldn't believe. All of those come at a cost. And so is this hard to talk about? Absolutely. But what I would say is, you know, keep it simple. 1, lower property tax bills. 2, support local services. 3, keep our promise to our schools. So with that, I will close. I'll stop my share. Happy to answer any questions. And I appreciate you letting me walk you through HH.
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it. Kathy White has been kind enough to answer some of the questions that have come through the chat. Here's another one from Evie. I believe that Initiative 50 is a constitutional amendment, correct?
Yes, and they got their signatures in 52 days. They hired 7 signature gathering firms. They got 2% from every Senate district, and they have submitted their signatures.
Okay, and it will take 55% to pass. Okay, we're running a little behind here. So if anyone has any other questions for Scott, I'd appreciate it if you'd put them in the chat, and we will be sure he gets them.
Yeah, and I'm gonna jump off, but I'm always happy to answer questions, and I really appreciate the work that all of you do. You're our favorite coffee mug.
Excellent. Thanks so much. We really appreciate your work and your support.
Thank you.
And on to our next speaker. Julie Reiskin is the co-executive director of the Colorado Cross Disability Coalition, which advocates for social justice for people with all types of disabilities and carries the motto, "Nothing about us, without us, ever." CCDC has led the way in citizen or client engagement, and CCDC trained advocates permeate the Colorado public policy arena. CCDC and Reiskin assist other organizations with assuring real and meaningful participation by clients at all levels. In 2010, Ms. Reiskin was appointed by President Obama to serve on the board of directors of the Legal Services Corporation as a client representative. In 2018, she was elected to serve on the board of the ACLU of Colorado and is currently chair of that board. She's also a member of the Board of Trustees for the Denver Foundation and the treasurer of the National Pain Advocacy Center. Ms. Reiskin is an adjunct faculty member at the University of Denver at the Graduate School of Social Work, acting as a field liaison and teaching macro practice social work. She also helps organizations develop disability cultural competence and understand the intersection of ableism with racism and other forms of oppression. Julie, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. And unfortunately, my dogs have really embraced the free speech thing with the ACLU. So hopefully they will stop expressing themselves for a couple minutes here. I'm going to share my screen really quick. I have one slide. So I'm really excited because usually when I'm asked to talk about stuff, I'm talking about problems, but in Colorado and talking about disability voting, I get to talk about how well it's working. So we are so lucky to live in Colorado because we have a really inclusive, really accessible voting system here. As you know, as people know, we all get our mail ballot, and we also all have an opportunity to go into a vote center. The Secretary of State, and I will note both the current Secretary of State and the one before her have been really good about making sure that the county clerks and the election judges are trained, and they're trained in the accessible equipment. We also have some provisions about people in institutional settings and that how their ballots are delivered and connected. But we all get that, and we all have plenty of time to read our ballots, to think about them. We can drop them off, we can mail them if we do it in time, or we can go somewhere. There are some people, though, for whom this doesn't work, and those are people that are considered what we call print disabled. And that's someone who either their eyes don't work or they don't have enough fine motor skills to do the circles and the ballots. And since everyone else gets to vote in the privacy of their home, we've ran legislation to make sure that it is equal and that everyone can now vote in the privacy of their home. So people who qualify as print disabled through a very secure system can apply to vote online. And that has been an incredible experience. We've heard from people who for the first time in their life or adult life got to vote in private because of the system. They didn't have to have someone else assist them. Now, people can have someone assist them if they want, and some people want that and others don't. So we have very, very few problems in Colorado with accessible voting. So there's no excuse for people with disabilities or anyone else in the state not to vote. We do a lot of encouragement of, we do a lot of get out the vote work. We also encourage our members to work for the candidate that speaks to their heart and their values. We're nonpartisan, but we do encourage everyone to vote, and we also do nonpartisan ballot guides where we do take positions on some, not all initiatives, and we try and put ballot initiatives in plain language. And boy, HH gave us a run for our money. That was a tough one to put in plain language. But that's really all I have, is that Colorado has the best system, the gold standard, and people with disabilities can vote in private and in an accessible way. So I can answer any questions, but
great.
That's all I
Thanks,
have.
Julie. I have a question for you just on, well, I'll let Maud ask it because I have a funny feeling she's going to ask the same question. Go ahead, Maud.
Probably not. I was just going to say that, as you probably know, Julie, the league supported allowing people with a print disability to vote, return their ballot electronically. Although I would quibble, you say it's a very secure system. It's a pretty secure system, but we all know people where things have gone sprung in online banking, and the problems are even worse for returning ballots by mail because, of course, people are not supposed to know that Julie voted yes on a particular proposition or against a particular candidate. So that makes the tracing the issues much harder, and keeping all the electrons in the right place and nefarious people out more difficult.
Yeah, I think what makes it work is it's not a huge number of people. It's a
Exactly.
it's a very limited pool, and we did it that way deliberately. So it's not, and so it can't just be someone saying like, there's a process to even get this.
Thank you.
I can't speak to the technology. Curtis Chung is our expert on that, and he is out of the country right now because initially I asked him to join in this, but he's not available. But he's really our expert in that, in the actual like how it works, how the technology works.
Yeah. Yeah. And thank you. You're right. The limited number is the key.
Okay. Christina is wondering how these systems are handled at the local level.
I can't speak for the whole state. I know Denver has a system because it was piloted. I believe it was piloted in Denver, but I really can't speak for the whole state. I can see if Curtis can answer that when he's back in town and get back to y'all, but I don't know the answer.
Great, I'd
Maybe someone
appreciate
else
that.
here knows the answer, but I don't.
Anyone? Great. We will reach out to Curtis and in partnership with you, Julie. Thank you for
Sure.
that. Okay, thank you so much. It's always reassuring to hear other people reiterate what we know to be true, and especially, from vulnerable communities. So we're so pleased with your partnership and your work, Julie, in making Colorado the best place for people to cast a vote, all people. So thank you. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, one thing I will say is I think there is still a lot of disinformation out there. We, particularly with some of our rural young people, when we were doing some outreach, we had some, again, it tended to be rural young people with disabilities, and they were saying, well, I don't want to vote because I don't want to have to wait in line 8 hours. And it's like, this was someone in Cortez. It's like, well, you wouldn't anyway, but like they didn't understand that some of those stories are not even in Colorado, like anywhere in Colorado. So I still think that there is education that we need to do, particularly with our first time voters, because they're on social media and they're seeing all of the chaos and, sadly that is in other states.
Great, thank you. That's what the league exists to do. So thanks for that. Okay, it's now time for a short break. If everyone would like to stand up and sit down and use the restroom as they need, get a drink, please join us back here in 10 minutes at 12:05. That'll help us to get a little bit back more on schedule. So see you at 12:05. Thanks so much. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for staying with us. Now I am excited to introduce you to our voter services team, our fabulous and physically beautiful voter services team, made up of board members Barbara Whinery and Chris Humphries, and our Vote 411 coordinator, Cath Perrone. They are here to tell you about resources associated with ballot issues, which the Colorado State League has been putting out since 1936. Okay, voter services team, all you.
Forgot to unmute. Sorry about that. Thank you very much, Beth. And for the introductions. And I'd also like to, recognize all of the staff who's been involved from the very beginning on this project. Katrina Frierson, Jane Dunk, and of course our colleague and team member, Maud Naroll and her team. It really did take a village to undertake this huge project. I'm going to start by just kind of reviewing the story and how this all unfolded for the past 9 months. We started in January and began a discussion about updating our voter service materials as part of a developing new League of Women Voters Colorado 4-year strategic plan. And we wanted to know how we could re-envision our voter service materials that provide education to the public about voter registration and state ballot issues. Our goal was to ensure our publications, along with our outreach plan, that our materials were self-sustaining, accurate, reliable, and relevant to an ever-changing environment. We decided to focus on our state ballot issue pamphlet, as Beth mentioned, that started in 1936 and features the information about ballot issue measures at the state level and included pros and cons. And it's hard to believe that we've been doing it for 87 years. And this is one of the first major revisions that we've undertaken in quite a while. The issues we faced with the current ballot issue pamphlet was, number one, we had competition with other organizations. We found out there was a religious ballot issue website that was being constructed. The Bell Policy Center for the last couple of years has had new and engaging ballot measure information. New Era is sending pamphlets to our homes and talking about candidates, and which we don't do, and ballot issue pamphlets. And finally, the Colorado Blue Book, if many of you have been following it over the years, has really improved and has simplified its explanations about the ballot issues so that they're easier to understand. And they've also provided materials and graphics to help us break down what each of them mean. Communications have changed. Technology has changed dramatically, especially in the post-COVID era, and especially how people get their information. Most of us use technology like iPhones, iPads, different platforms like websites to get our information. And probably because of all of this, many of us have a shorter attention span. Text is not the only medium for educating our voters. For examples, there's many infographics, there's audio and social media. And I was just looking at all the presentations today to see how everyone was sharing information, especially very complex information, with their slideshows and the different graphics they used. We faced another important challenge, and that was with mis and disinformation. In the last 4 years especially, facts have been under attack. Printing our pro and con statements may or may not be accurate. Were we, with our pro and cons statements, were we part of the problem? Are they inaccurate or misleading to voters? Do we want to jeopardize the league's reputation, since we're not sure exactly what the sources of what those pros and cons may be? Also, at times there were some tensions between voter service and advocacy. We were working in competition with each other. Voter service people were presenting their pros and cons that they had solicited from each side. But oftentimes they were in conflict with the people who were working in advocacy, and in some cases in favor of a ballot issue, but at the same time, we are advocating against it with our voter service information. And lastly, we really need to look at our overall production of the pamphlet, use of resources, costs. For example, shipping this past year was almost as much to some leagues as it was to purchase the ballot issues themselves. How we use volunteers, the kind of time they're being spent in preparation for the ballot measure presentations, we all wanted to re-examine those issues. Our next steps were to collect data and information by interviewing our stakeholders. In February, we convened small and large league focus groups to review the ballot issue pamphlet content. What do voters want to know? In most cases, they wanted to know where league stands. How accurate were our pros and cons, and how valid were the opinions from opponents and proponents? What was the preparation time that volunteers needed to put materials together? What were the high costs of shipping, production, distribution? Was it accessible to all voters? Were underserved populations and BIPOC communities accessible? Was it accessible to them? And I'd like to give a special shout out to Chris Humphries, who helped us with it, giving us her invaluable input on how we could better reach those communities. The use of technology, were we using it effectively and efficiently? Those were the questions we were trying to address. In May, we followed up with a meeting with our News and Literacy Task Force members to discuss suggestions we'd received from them on how to probably do a better, more accurate production of what the content of the ballot measures were. Was that valid information? Did we need to vet the content? Where did we need disclaimers on every page? Where do we put those? Those were a lot of the questions we were wrestling with as we were doing our evaluation. And last but not least, we were able to touch base with the advocacy team. Of course, we had to give them some time to rest after the legislative session, but we want to discuss how we could work together to move forward to revise, reinvent, revitalize our ballot issue publications by collaborating and using the league's expertise to design, develop materials that would accomplish our goals. Luckily, and it's been kind of a serendipitous journey, in July, June, July, we hired a new communications development manager, Katrina Frierson, who jumped in listening to what we wanted to accomplish. She also wanted us to do a better job of branding our publications. And I will just probably say from here on out, the rest is history. The voter service and advocacy teams worked together all summer, I might add, to design the materials we will be presenting to you today and this on Monday when we have a training. Always keeping in mind the line between voter service materials, which need to be separate from advocacy materials that provide a stance on where League stands. We also really wanted to emphasize and bring to the forefront the expertise of both teams, but especially our voter service team. And related to not only the ballot issues, but in creating pros and cons ourselves, not asking from each of the different proponents and opponents, but also publicizing our stances on ballot issues. We've done that in the past, but it's always been a little handout that the voter service people got from the advocacy team that we used after our presentations on the ballot issue pamphlets. The outcome I think you'll be pleased with is the newly designed ballot issue materials that are easier to read, newer, fresher design, reduced cost. They're very interactive with technology, especially our website and the information they can get from there. And we plan to feature them on our website as well. Easier access by all voters and a variety of formats that we feel will make a higher impact with lower costs. We're also developing toolkits that are designed to help our volunteers to better prepare and give ballot issue presentations. We felt this year was a good year to try this pilot because it usually has fewer ballot issues because the ballot issues are focused on fiscal issues. Also, although unfortunately, it seems to be that this year is a very complicated ballot issue pamphlet as related to the issues themselves. We did plan to follow up with surveys and interviewing our stakeholders so we can evaluate the ballot issue materials, toolkits, and impact. And before I move forward with more information about the materials, once again, I'd like to offer a huge thanks for all of those who've given so much of their time, their energy, and expertise to this project and making it happen. A special thanks also goes out to the Ramsey Foundation for their continued support of the ballot issues. Naroll of Action and Advocacy team will be talking more about the advocacy portion of where we stand, where the League stands, booklets and pamphlets, but I will now turn it over to Cath Perrone, who has done a fantastic job with the voter service ballot issue pamphlet, toolkit, and to talk more about them and also the upcoming training materials and how we can use them effectively. Thanks, Cath.
Hi, all. On your screen, I'm hoping you can see the two new ballot issue pamphlets. Are you seeing it, Barb?
Yes.
Okay, great. You'll notice a couple of different things. As Barb explained, one of the issues that we had going forward was the pro-con arguments. And to solve that problem and to test it out for this year, we moved the pro-con arguments under where the League stands, which is under the advocacy piece, and took them out of the voter service piece. So there are two pamphlets now available to local leagues, and they've placed their orders, and Jane and the crew at the office have been mailing them out, and you guys are scheduling your pickups. But I wanted to point out a couple of different things. One, you'll notice the colors are different on the two pamphlets. Again, that separation of voter service and advocacy. The voter service is in blue and gold. The advocacy is red and gold. And the information found in these materials are definitely overlapping, but then where the league stands continues with the pro-con arguments, and then where the league stands on both issues. Beyond just the pamphlets, there's a rack card for the voter service. A rack card is just an 8.5 by like 4. That is a stand-up. It's two-sided. It gives Proposition HH and II overview with a QR code to the impact statements. What else we have is, let me change screens. Sorry, come on. Is for the advocacy side, there is a business card that can be handed out that is two-sided, that states the statewide where the league stands. And then on the back side, the league recommends yes on both Proposition HH and II. For more information now, you can use the QR code to go to the website that explains why we're taking the stand of yes on both. And Andrea and Maud will be talking about that shortly. But I just wanted to show you some of the materials that we have. And then one more share here. Is that coming up? I think that's coming up. Is that coming up now?
No.
Oh, okay. Hold on. It was the invitation for Monday's event. Let me see if I can.
I don't know if Beth has access to that quickly or not.
I stopped sharing. I had it here a second ago. Too many JPEGs.
You know, well, in the meantime, while Cath's looking for it, we realized that we didn't have enough time today to do the kind of training and information processing that we usually do. But we're going to set aside some time tomorrow from 4:30 to 6 to really go through all these materials and help with the PowerPoint. Hopefully we've been working on a video and just all the information that those of you who are involved with ballot issue presentations, both voter service and advocacy people. So we can do more in-depth discussions about the information that you need to have and be prepared to speak.
And this meeting is Monday at 4:30.
Maybe do you have a link to that?
Yep, I will get the link into the chat.
Oh, great. Thank you very much.
You bet.
And then in the meantime, can I bring up my other slide, Barb? Is this okay?
Sure.
Do we have any questions in the chat before we transition?
Nope.
Nope. Okay. I think Beth wants to, or Cath wants to make some comments about Vote 411.
I just wanted to give a heads up. We go live October 9th, 1 week before the ballots drop. Over 700 candidates have been invited with over 300 races posted. I want to thank my Vote 411 team across the state. You guys are amazing with the information that you've dug up for me and the input that you've accomplished. Every school board election that has not been canceled is in Vote 411. Every municipal election that has not been canceled is in Vote 411. Every ballot issue, statewide and local, will be in Vote 411. So starting October 9th, the voter guide will be live. Check it out. Make sure that it's working right for your address. Check it against your ballot. Let me know if there's a conflict. And we'll fix them before the ballots drop on the 16th.
Barb, you're muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say thank you. I think that's all we had, Beth. Thank you.
Excellent. We're working to get that meeting link into the chat. Yes, we will absolutely record that meeting and make it available. We apologize that that was scheduled on Yom Kippur. Apologies for that.
Yes.
This was hastily put together. So apologies. But thank you to our voter service team, Barb, Chris, and Cath. Your work is so vital and so deeply appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Next, we have our fabulous and beautiful Action and Advocacy team, Cathy Wilson, Maud Naroll, who serve as co-directors of Action and Advocacy on the LWVCO board, as well as our legislative liaison, Andrea Wilkins. Please welcome.
Thank you. Andrea, I think I'm going first and you have a slide. Is that correct?
Yes, I am going to share my screen now. Okay, hopefully everyone can see this.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes, great.
And Maud, I will let you kick it off.
Yes, thank you. As you've already heard, the good news is there are only 2 issues on the state level ballot this year. The bad news is they're a little complicated, but you know, Scott Wasserman and Kathy White did a fabulous job of talking and about HH and laying groundwork on II. So Proposition HH reduced property taxes and retain state tax revenue. And then Proposition II, which is the cleanup on a 2020 measure, retain nicotine tax revenue in excess of Blue Book estimate. And both of these were referred to the legislature, referred to the citizens, referred to the ballot by the legislature. You may have seen people outside the grocery store trying to get signatures on Initiative 50. That's a citizen initiative. Those that will not be on this ballot, that will be on 2024. Next. So the League recommends voting yes on Proposition II, retain nicotine tax revenue in excess of Blue Book estimate. In 2020, we voters approved Proposition EE, new taxes on nicotine products, think about vaping, and tax rate increases on cigarettes and tobacco products. And we approved sending that new revenue to a new Colorado Universal Free School preschool program. Proposition II would keep those tax rates that we already approved and increase funding for the preschool program, giving our little people a better start. If Prop II fails, the tax rates we already approved will be cut back permanently, and over $20 million of already collected taxes will be refunded back to tobacco, cigarette, and nicotine wholesalers and distributors, and the preschool program will get less money going forward. The League of Women Voters believes that the education of a young child is a shared responsibility, all of us, and that education financing should equalize opportunity. Public funding for the Colorado preschool program shares the responsibility of educating our young. And by being universal and free, the preschool program equalizes opportunity across the state. Proposition II sends more money to the preschool program. So we recommend voting yes. Next. I really appreciate how Scott Wasserman explained Proposition HH, reduce property taxes and retain state revenue. So I'm just going to say that the League supports adequate funding for public schools while relieving the property tax. Proposition HH does both. It relieves property taxes and protects funding for public schools. So we ask you, please vote yes for both the statewide propositions, HH and II. Any questions? They did the hard part. I just got to do the easy part. Peggy, you're on mute.
Yeah, just wondering about the wording cuts property taxes from current levels. So, I paid property taxes earlier this year. Is it going to be lower if we pass HH? Or is it going to be lower from what is projected to happen with all this?
It will not be lower than your last property tax bill. I'm sorry, that's not gonna happen. But our homes values went up astoundingly. And 2022, the valuation year, was probably the peak. So it will, under HH, our bills would be lower than they would be without HH. Does that answer?
Yes, I just find it a little misleading the way it's written.
I didn't catch the word cut in that. I usually try to use the word relieve property taxes rather than cut. So my bad for the amount of text that we've been producing over the last few weeks is a lot, and I missed that edit.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, it's really the current levels that I think is misleading. So anyway, because that needs to be defined.
Yeah, it's the level for your 2023 tax year, which we pay next year. So current law levels under current law, maybe. So.
All right, thank you.
So, and Evie said it reduces property tax rates. Well, it reduces property tax assessment rates, not the actual tax rates that our local jurisdictions apply. And it also, for those of us who live in who own the home we live in, as Scott pointed out, there's that subtraction that comes off the total value of our home, the assessed value of our home before the assessment rate is applied. So we get a deduction. Susan, you're on mute. Susan Stark.
Please repeat, and if you can, expand upon what Scott said about how this will in fact help renters, because I think there's been a lot of PR about this is not good for people who rent versus people who own a residence.
So yes, it is. There is more benefit for people who own than who live in a home that they own rather than people who rent. For the 2023 tax year, in 2024, the TABOR refunds will be higher for the 60+% of Coloradans who earn $100,000 or less. And many of those people rent. So they will get benefit for a year, and the league has supported flat TABOR refunds consistently, and we will support them the next time they come up. And multifamily properties get that same, not only a lower property tax rate, they get a deduction as well. That doesn't, as Evie said, that doesn't automatically translate to landlords cutting rents. The hope is that they will not rise as quickly. So, other questions? And there's, I'm sure, arguments in the economic literature about what's called the incidence of property taxes on renters and how much is passed on and how much is. Marcia, you're on mute.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just going to say I read Evie's note in the chat, and I have a rental property. I have one little house that I rent. And just because my property taxes may be lowered on that house because of the new valuation, my insurance costs are going to go up. So I think it's a wash in that respect, which perhaps is one reason why some particularly small landlords like me will not necessarily be able to pass on property tax savings.
I think what we're doing is avoiding rent hikes, because if your property taxes went up by as much as your property value had gone up, you might have to raise rent. And I think, landlords got to bring in enough money to cover the money going out. So I think some of the hope is to keep rent increases lower. So, other questions? Great, thank you. I'm going to turn this over to Andrea. So yes on both HH and II, please.
Thank you,
Andrea?
Maud.
Yeah, it's yours.
I will pick it up now with a preview of the 2024 session. It feels kind of odd to say that. This year has flown by. It was mentioned earlier that fall really kicks off a busy time at the league with the elections. It's also the point in the year where the interim activity starts to really kick up, and people are starting to really look ahead to the next legislative session. So that's kind of the phase that the Legislative Action Committee is heading into now, including, myself, along with Maud and Kathy, as we, try and maintain a good read on what some of the interim conversations are, and some of the priorities that are being discussed in the community that are very vital to the league's work. But before I get to the substance of any of that, I do want to flag some dates for all of you. The session will be convening on January 10th. That is a Wednesday, and the convening hour is 10 a.m. So for those that like to turn into that, members of the LAC, that'll be a date that you want to note. You will be able to listen to those proceedings remotely, or of course you can always go down to the General Assembly in person and see kind of the pomp and circumstance associated with the opening day. As always, the session runs for 120 days. So we'll see a flurry of activity between January 10th and sometime sort of early to mid-May, kind of in that window. I'm not exactly sure what the adjournment date is, but a lot happening in those 120 days. Another thing that will be getting underway that we're very excited about is the bi-weekly legislative action committees. I think, as most people probably know on the call, the Legislative Action Committee is the State League's core of citizen lobbyists that research, monitor, and actively lobby on a wide range of bills. We typically follow and advocate for somewhere in the neighborhood of about 100 bills on topics that span our position book. So really runs the gamut from social policy to environmental to government. Basically, you name it, we try and have someone covering it. Along with that, we like to head into the session giving our LAC members all the tools that they might need and all the refreshing they might need for the members that have been with us for many sessions now through our advocacy training series that gets underway on Friday, November 3rd, and will take place in a 3-part series similar to how we did last year. The sessions are conducted via Zoom, as are the LAC meetings. So for anyone that's wanting to tune into those, they are on the calendar now, so you'll be able to get the information there. Okay, so getting this on the web. Oh, sorry, my wash is trying to talk to me for some reason. Okay, sorry about that. Getting into some of the details of the anticipated legislation that really aligns with league priorities that I want to make you all aware of. There's several things that are, I think, going to be high profile, some things that deal with a lot of large scale structural change, a lot of important initiatives that are legislation, I should say, with our ballot issue discussion. I don't want to use the word initiative and get things confused, but a lot of important efforts underway that the league is monitoring and participating in. The first here on my slide is the statewide ballot initiative to protect abortion rights in Colorado. In this case, initiative is the right word to use. We are anticipating a referred measure to the 2024 ballot that would enshrine the right to an abortion and reproductive health care into the Colorado Constitution. The effort would also address the current ban on public funding for abortion services. That is something that we plan to follow closely and actively push for. So, this is an initiative that we've known was in the making for some time, and we're really excited to see efforts underway to ensure that that protection continues in Colorado in a really durable way. The next thing I want to mention is a revived effort to introduce legislation that would basically, closely follow House Bill 23-1209, which was legislation that would require an analysis of statewide publicly funded healthcare. This was a bill that LWVCO followed and supported last year. We're excited about a renewed effort to get this this legislation through. Basically, I think anyone that follows legislation closely or participates in the LAC knows that towards the end of the session, the calendar becomes really crazy, and oftentimes really just the clock runs out before we can see a final resolution on legislation. And that's really what happened in the case of 1209. So we're excited to see the effort come back. The bill would require the Colorado School of Public Health to analyze model legislation for a publicly financed and privately delivered universal healthcare payment system for Colorado that directly compensates providers. It would also create a statewide healthcare task force to assist with analysis and advise the Colorado School of Public Health, and they would be required to submit a report to the General Assembly. This effort's really a 2-part effort, with the first step requiring the study to really kind of inform the overall approach, and then separate legislation would follow to focus on implementation. We're really excited about this in the sense that, you know, it will help advance our position in supporting healthcare access and affordability. And we know this is a big concern for Coloradans across the state and some of our partner organizations. And I'll kind of touch on some of the priorities that we've been hearing discussed in the larger community in just a bit here. I also want to turn to another big structural effort that is underway, also in the form of kind of a revived effort. It would be sort of a revisiting of Senate Bill 23-213, which was the big land use bill. The focus of that bill would be last session, it would have been to require the Department of Local Affairs to adopt model codes to increase higher density housing options and to create methodologies for assessing and planning for residential housing needs. The idea here is to really increase the stock of affordable housing that is available in Colorado, but do so in a way that really promotes smart growth with, you know, co-location near transportation and vital services, as well as being mindful of environmental considerations. This was a big bill that was supported through or pushed through by the governor's office. It did not end up passing. And so we are expecting another attempt this year, possibly with, you know, a slightly different approach where we may see a couple of bills that kind of attempt the same goal and the same purpose instead of one comprehensive bill. That process is, you know, still unfolding, and our housing lobbyist team will be very active in that realm. We've also heard some discussion about the possibility of a legislative oversight committee on affordable housing and homelessness. We know that, you know, these are big issues, big priorities for Coloradans across the board. So that will be something that we'll be watching as well. I want to mention some immigration legislation that one of our lobbyists is following through the interim. There's sort of an emerging effort around allowing the state to hire individuals regardless of immigration status. And that's really kind of become sort of a national push as it's gaining traction. So I think that there could be some really interesting developments there that we will continue to follow and be involved in those stakeholder discussions. We are aware of an effort to develop some legislation that would clarify the requirements of volunteer lobbyists. So something that would really impact the LAC, getting more clarity around, you know, what you need to report, when you need to register as a volunteer lobbyist. It would be helpful for organizations such as us that really rely heavily on citizen lobbyists. There's also some discussions underway about a possible state voting rights act. The intent there would be to introduce legislation that through a state VRA to, you know, kind of add some protections and really strengthen enforcement of the federal act. That's a very emerging effort right now, so I don't have a lot of details to share there, but definitely something we'll be tuning into and having more discussions around. And then finally, I want to mention an effort to update the Colorado open meetings law. You all might recall that a few months back, there was a lawsuit filed by Representatives Elizabeth Epps and Bob Marshall that alleged persistent violations of Colorado's open meeting requirements against the House Democratic leadership. It was kind of an unusual lawsuit in the sense that members of the Democratic Party, Democratic representatives brought this against Democratic leadership, alleging that some of the caucus meetings were not being publicized and formal business was taking place. So there's been an agreement that's come out of that where the House will agree not to take any formal action in any meeting in which a quorum of a state body is expected to be in attendance without first providing public notice of the meeting. The settlement agreement is to be in place until action is taken to update the Colorado Meetings and Public Records Law during the 2024 session. And given our strong interest in public participation and transparency, we'll be closely watching that unfold as well. Okay, I also want to say a little bit about the work of the interim committees, which is really starting to kick into high gear right now. For those that may not be terribly familiar, the interim committees cover select topics during the time that the legislature is not in session. So kind of convening and picking up some preliminary work after the May adjournment, and then it sort of goes on through the summer and then really picks up steam in the fall. That culminates in the committees making bill recommendations for legislation to be introduced in the 2024 session. And the Legislative Council Committee will review those recommendations during a hearing of that committee on November 14th. So tuning into that is a great way to get a sense of some of the bills that will be moving forward in a variety of areas, the topics that are covered by the interim committees. So that's something that I would definitely recommend doing. There are a couple of committees that have kind of shared some of the priorities that they're addressing on their website. You can kind of access some of the documents that they've generated. You'll see that the Committee on the Treatment of Persons with Behavioral Health Disorders that are involved in the criminal or juvenile justice system is really focused on strengthening the state's response to the behavioral health crisis and looking at protections for the rights of individuals with behavioral health diagnoses in the criminal justice system. And then I also want to mention some of the policy proposal recommendations that have come out of the Colorado Youth Advisory Council Committee. The council is allowed to make recommendations for the introduction of 3 bills. They have requested that 5 be drafted. So you can kind of see here all the various priorities that they're considering. Some really important issues that impact youth in Colorado, but the one in particular that I want to draw your attention to, this has been something that's been discussed in our gun violence prevention task force. Our gun violence prevention lobbyists on the LAC are very interested in some of the activity surrounding their policy proposal dealing with violence against youth, specifically the prevention, intervention, and response in Colorado schools. The legislative approach that they are recommending here is that the Office of Gun Violence Prevention would convene a task force to examine gun violence prevention in schools. And they would be charged with looking at a whole host of things, including any kind of disparities in resources and response that occurs in rural areas. But specifically, they would be looking at things like the availability of school counselors, threat assessment training that's provided to counselors and school resource officers, threat assessment results, funding that's available for more resources in this area. They'd be analyzing the effectiveness of Safe to Tell and looking at long-term mental health supports that are available. The other interesting piece of this bill is that it would require school districts to inform parents about the safe storage of firearms. I think many will recall that LWVCO supported the safe storage law in Colorado. And, while that's a great thing, it's only really effective if people know about it. So education to families and parents is something that COYAC is feeling is really necessary as, another piece in the puzzle in reducing violence overall and keeping guns out of the hands of minors. So we are really excited to see where that legislation goes. They will be recommending the 3 bills that they advance on October 25th. So we should have a better sense soon as to what exactly they'll be focusing on and whether this bill will be amongst the 3. I want to talk very, very quickly about the September revenue forecast, the quarterly revenue forecast. The Joint Budget Committee was briefed on the updated forecast just a couple of days ago on September 20th. And I think kind of the overarching high-level takeaway is that our economy is proving to be very resilient, fortunately. Given all of the economic chaos that we've been through over the last few years, there's been lots of concern about whether we were headed for a recession. The impact of inflation has been kind of a persistent problem. Coloradans have been affected by cost of living and, sort of those fallout effects of inflation. So there's just been a lot of concern about where we were ultimately going to end up. But sort of the high level takeaway of this report was that, we seem to be really kind of headed for what they refer to as that soft landing. In other words, not heading into a recession. That being said, as part of the budgeting process, there's still a whole lot of attention being paid to, external factors that, potentially could push us into a recession and really impact the availability of funds that are available for new programming created through legislation this session. Really, I think one of the main things that's of concern there is a potential overcorrection by the Fed in terms of, trying to get inflation under control. But for the most part, it seems that we've landed in a decent place and we're maintaining our reserves. You can kind of see the slide has a lot of detail here, so I won't go through all that. But it also does include a link to the full report that's got all the information you could want on this topic. So I will leave it at that. I also want to mention the important work that's taking place within our task forces. As I think probably lots of you know, maybe some of you don't, since the task forces are a newer entity within the LWVCO structure. But, our task forces are intended to be year-round groups that focus on select issues. I believe we have 9 of them, if I'm remembering correctly. Someone can jump in and correct me if I'm wrong. But we're focusing on, really key priority areas for the league. And the idea is that, we take that, on the ground information, the statewide perspective, and really use that to feed into our state's advocacy agenda. So the task forces really work hand in hand with the LAC, and there is quite a bit of overlap within those. And there's always an LAC liaison on each of the task forces. Just to kind of give you a very quick update on what some of the task forces have been doing. The Alternative Voting Methods Task Force has been very busy on promoting statewide education efforts around AVM. And they're also involved in supporting the LWVCO primary election reform study. So some really significant efforts underway there. Our housing task force is following closely the renewed efforts around Senate Bill 23-213, the legislation that I mentioned just a minute ago. They'll be heavily involved in those discussions and also examining legislative strategies for addressing homelessness. They recently had a great speaker that provided a lot of information that I think is very useful to our advocacy agenda and the legislative approaches people may be interested in more broadly. The News Access and Literacy Task Force is conducting a presentation on the loss of local news and its impact on democracy. Obviously a very concerning situation that we've been seeing all around the country, Colorado included. And they have made a request to LWVCO to adopt the Washington State's League position on local news by concurrence. The Elections Task Force had a great speaker the other day. We were joined by Judd Choate with the Secretary's Office to talk about voting access and barriers to voting, including some potential strategies for really kind of expanding access and facilitating the ability of people to vote. They have focused a lot on special districts. That's been an area where we've really gained a lot of expertise lately. So that's been fantastic. And then monitoring the situation in Weld County regarding the county commissioner redistricting process and implementation of House Bill 21-1047, which was intended to govern that process. The Climate Emergency Task Force is doing a presentation, or maybe it has just taken place. I'm losing track of my Zoom meetings, but they are examining the role of carbon capture in climate solutions. And the Violence Prevention Task Force had a great presentation on implementing evidence-based strategies to prevent violence, and really kind of taking a holistic approach to promoting healthy communities, healthy youth and well-being, and kind of looking at all of those things with an eye towards how they come together to prevent gun violence. I want to say just a little bit, I know we're just about out of time, but I will quickly mention some partner priorities. I recently attended a presentation by the Colorado Latino Agenda, where they talked about some of their priority policy issues for the upcoming session. Really kind of ranking at the top of their list were economic concerns, particularly the cost of housing, wages, and of course the cost of healthcare. Gun violence prevention and concerns about political violence are another big concern, especially knowing that, Latinx communities tend to be disproportionately impacted by gun violence. So a very big concern for voters within the Latinx community. Reproductive health access is a big concern, and they recently issued a report. They did a pretty extensive survey of Latino voters in Colorado around these policy priorities. So if you're interested in digging deeper into that, you can access the report there. Beth had recently attended an event by one of our partner organizations, Colorado Black Women for Political Action. Similarly, they had spoken a little bit about policy priorities for the upcoming session. And you see a lot of overlap: community safety, police violence, and equal enforcement of the ERPO law. Were kind of top concerns for them. Behavioral health was another concern, and economic concerns, including healthcare, housing, and cost of living, were some of the things mentioned. And finally, the last one I want to mention, Kathy and I had recently attended a meeting of Great Education Colorado, where they I would say in all these cases, Great Education Colorado, the things I'm highlighting here, I think really align with our priorities as an organization and things that we are very concerned about as well. So definitely wanted to draw those to your attention with the idea that, as we join up with partner communities and others in the stakeholder community, we just amplify our voice. So it's always very helpful to be in tune with what some of our partner organizations are doing. In terms of Great Education Colorado, they are really kind of promoting what they refer to as their public education voter campaign, so to speak. I'm not sure exactly the terminology they use for that, but essentially the components they see there are a yes vote on HH and II, similar to us. Yes to candidates that are committed to welcoming and adequately and equitably funded schools. And then also really engaging in the debates and informational forums that are available on choosing school board candidates. Similar to the league, Great Education Colorado does not endorse any candidates, but we do believe in being an informed voter when you're making those decisions. And so they've posed some questions that they feel are very useful to ask of your school board candidates. And we've listed them here because we agree that these are very important things. That you really want to know where your candidates stand before you cast a vote for them. So we wanted to publicize that and kind of share that information. And I think that is all. That was a little bit of a whirlwind, but we're 2 minutes over. So I will stop sharing my screen. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them now or through follow-up conversations or email, whatever works for you all.
Well, thanks, Andrea. I think we'll hold the questions. My head is spinning. Oh my gosh. I live in this world, in the middle of this world in Denver. I get to go down to the offices and hear what people are doing. But it's amazing when we put on this event, this 3-hour event, all that everyone's doing, whether it's staff, it's our members, it's our partners. It's so many people that we have to thank to put this on. Voter services, guys, you've changed the game. You're right. This is a whole new level of doing business. It's a whole new level of doing business with action and advocacy, how we promote, how we PR. Katina has done a beautiful job on the pamphlets, etc. I just from my heart think, wow, there's so much going on. The task forces, I mean, really get the word out that we have task forces. If people are excited about one particular topic, they can join a task force and get really involved. They don't necessarily have to be on the LAC. They can be on the task force, which, by the way, directly influences the Legislative Action Committee on what they do throughout the year. I thought also, Andrea, you started to tell us the legislative session works 120 days a year. Well, they don't work very hard. We're working 365, I think, our group. It's just amazing. I think they can get away with 120 days a year because there are organizations like the League of Women Voters that carry the water for them for the rest of the year and keep things moving. So really, Andrea, whew, that was a wonderful presentation. I'm hoping that you will share your slides, etc. Beth, yes, all the questions you will make available to everyone. Truly, it is a testament to the League's relevance right now, and we are really needed more than ever. I want to thank all of you. I want to thank each one of our speakers sharing their expertise and you all attending on this beautiful Saturday. Thanks to the staff and board members who work hard to put this event together. Thanks to all of you who are working to educate and turn out our state's voters. Now, please go out into this autumn day and enjoy it, because we live in a democracy that allows us freedom to do just that. Meeting's adjourned.